What I'm here to talk to you about today briefly is to cover some of the takeaways from the NAR settlement. First item, NAR policy changes as of right now take effect on the 17th of August. I've been advised there's been a little bit of controversy about this. We're not 100% sure that this is going to happen, but as it stands right now, 17 August is going to be the start of the new rules involving the NAR lawsuit. So as it stands right now, currently, NAR has filed an appeal to the ruling through the Department of Justice. But as it stands, 17 August is going to be the start date for all the changes. Now, one of the major policy changes is that MLS can no longer display commission offers. NAR is going to eliminate requirement for listing agents to offer compensation to buyer's agents or other representatives. Although it is still permitted to pay a buyer's agent, they're just not allowed to advertise it in the multiple listing service. Also, MLSs are not allowed to create workarounds to that rule. Listing agents and sellers will be prohibited from including offers of compensation to buyer's agents on the MLS. In fact, MLSs must remove fields related to compensation information. Now, one of the biggest things as a real estate broker that is going to be important for my agents and any real estate agent out there in the state of Texas is that buyers have to sign a written agreement before touring homes. Now, I do believe that there is some confusion about this, and how is this going to be regulated? How do you police this? And so it'll fall on the individual brokerages and the agents themselves to make sure that they adhere to this rule. Does this mean that you can't go and show a home without having some sort of written documentation? Technically, that's what the rule is saying as we're reading it. Again, I don't think it'll prevent you from meeting with a client, but one of the things you have to do is be able to explain to them how the new rule is going to cover buyer's representation. As the rule reads, as a buyer's agent, they must have an understanding in writing of what your services are and what your services cost, and that'll be up to you or your broker to make that determination. Buyer's agents will be required to have a signed agreement in place before touring homes with the consumer, but it doesn't have to be non-exclusive. My hope is that having a non-exclusive agreement in place helps my agents get buyer's rep agreements signed without making the buyers feel like they're pigeonholed into just using one agent. Still, that'll be the responsibility of the agent to make the consumer understand the value of using me as a real estate agent. Again, it doesn't have to be an exclusive buyer's rep agreement. It can be non-exclusive. It's my belief that the whole point of this is to give the buyer's agent an opportunity to explain the rules and how this is going to work for showing homes. And one of the biggest arguments, at least that we've had here, is none of us are going to work for free. I'm not going to do it. You're not going to do it. And so having said that, when you meet a buyer, the rules are you can't steer the consumer. Now, the problem I have with that is, again, saying this, I'm not working for free. And so I'm not allowed to steer a customer to purchase a certain property, or hey, they're not offering commission, I don't want to show the home. What this information is going to do is allow you to have the conversation with the consumer and explain, hey, listen, there's going to be properties where the seller is unwilling to pay commission. According to our agreement, this is what I'm asking for on the transaction. And so I think that's going to allow the buyer to kind of make the decision of, hey, I want to see this house because I can afford to pay my agent, or I can't afford to pay my agent what they're asking, and so I have to kind of relook the market. And trust me when I tell you, there seems to be a lot of fog surrounding this and how our approach is going to be and what we consider legal, or what is considered legal for us to take this approach. Because for me, the way I saw it is, I thought, reading this, I'm thinking, so if I have a buyer that comes and sits in front of me and they want to see 6 homes, and in the MLS, it doesn't tell me how the compensation works, how do I explain this to my consumer without violating any rules? Am I in a situation where I have to say nothing? Do I call all of these brokers on each listing and say, hey, are you guys offering compensation? I have a buyer that doesn't have the money to pay me and they're wanting to see if the seller will pay. What is going to be the steps that we're going to use to kind of work around these rules and still receive the compensation that we feel like we're entitled to when we're working with a consumer? One of the main reasons it is important now as a buyer's agent to do a buyer's presentation is so that there's no confusion or misunderstandings, that the consumer understands this property is not offering any compensation. It would have to come from you, or maybe we can negotiate a higher sales price as long as the property will appraise. There's definitely going to be some obstacles with this that as a collective, we're going to kind of have to learn how to navigate this. You're going to be an editing champ on this one. Good, good. Your compensation has to be clearly defined in the beginning. And so, you know, I've had a lot of questions about this, so if my compensation is clearly defined, let's say I sit down with my buyer and I say, I want to receive 2% or 3% from the sale of this property. And then we go and show a home and there's a bonus. I want to understand, and I want to be able to have this conversation with my agents, how that applies, how we can write our agreement with our customer, making sure with our client, making sure that they understand that, is this something where my minimum required is 3%, but if there's a $2,000 bonus on the sale of this home, that also belongs to me as well. And so I want to see these new contracts as they come in. We haven't seen them yet. We want to sit down and kind of study these documents, but these are some things that we have to think about, because I could see this going either way, where a buyer says, yeah, I'll agree to pay you 3%. And then you go and you show a property, like let's say a new construction, and they're offering 4%. Is this going to create an environment where my buyer is going to say, well, you know, I only agreed to pay you 3%. I want that other 1% back. How does that work? There's rules against that, especially if it's a government loan. You know, not paying the buyer or the purchaser monies that they did not pay in, i.e. earnest money option fee, so on and so forth. So this is all yet to become. We're going to see these documents. We're going to learn them. And as brokers, we're going to make sure that we educate our brokerages. You also will be required to communicate to the consumer that commissions are negotiable. And my assumption is that this is going to be covered in the document. I don't believe that any promulgated forms are going to leave these requirements out. I believe they're going to be there. Just so you're aware, you do have to have that conversation with the customer, and you'll have to learn how to navigate that and create scripts on how to have these conversations with the consumer, because when you tell a consumer that the commissions are negotiable, does that mean that the consumer is going to immediately want to negotiate with you as their agent? Sure. You know, that's going to be a possibility, and we have to make sure that we're saying the right things, that we're not violating any rules or any policies within our brokerage when we have these discussions. One of the reasons why I think that it's so important that we bring all of this together and we educate ourselves is that as an agent, you cannot filter listings based on buyer's agent compensation. And this brings me back to my argument as a broker. Well, my agents aren't going to work for free. And so if I can't have a discussion about the buyer's agent compensation per listing, how do I educate my buyer on the fact that they're going to have to pay me on this one and they're not going to have to pay me on this one? And I think that's something that collectively, again, as an industry, we're going to have to come together. The goal is always going to be to follow the rules. We don't want to break the rules that the Department of Justice has set forth, that any rules that NAR puts in place because of this. Now, having said that, NAR had already made this a rule in 2021. So if you haven't already understood this, go and study this and make sure that you understand. It will prevent you as an agent representing a buyer from going out and showing properties. And sometimes in some markets, there are brokerages that offer less compensation. This rule is meant to filter that and say you cannot deviate from showing those properties because that agency is only offering 1% or something to that effect. You have to make sure that you're very careful with that and follow those rules. Don't get caught in a situation where you're steering a buyer away from a certain brokerage's listings because they're not offering you your compensation that you have agreed upon in the buyer's rep agreement, that has to be a decision that the consumer makes on their own. That, hey, to make an offer on this property, according to our agreement, you agreed to pay me 3%. That broker's only paying 1%. That 2% is going to have to come either from you or whether it be in Texas, paragraph 12 of the contract, adding an amount that is paid back to you. We're going to work to figure all of this out. And some brokerages have already started learning the steps to take to move forward with these transactions. Something that I want to add to this is, so my client didn't understand all the media hype about how this is a new thing. Commissions have always been negotiable. As an industry, we've always known that. And so sometimes to me, I would look at this and not really understand what this was all about outside of a law firm bringing a lot of people into a lawsuit for them to make a ton of money. I'm not trying to be brash about it, but I do believe that the reality of it is that the consumers have always been aware that commissions were negotiable. And if you as a consumer come to me and want to hire me to represent you on a buyer side transaction or a listing side transaction, and we don't agree on the compensation, it's not personal. It's your decision to say, hey, I only want to pay 3% or 2% or 4%, whatever that might be. And then it's okay for me to say, no, I don't want to work for that much. And then you go and you hire someone else. I want to make sure that you understand that that's always been okay, and it's okay now to say, hey, I'm not going to work for that. This won't work for us. You're not going to tie the buyer into your agreement and say, hey, I only will take this amount of money. And so we're going to have to get really sharp on this, and we're really going to have to study this as script to make sure that not only are we following the rules, but that we're able to serve our clients and take care of them and still be compensated what we feel is adequate. I think it goes without saying that regardless of all this, as an industry, I feel that we believe that the client should always receive the best representation. And so we can't change that as an industry. We do as real estate agents have to look at things that maybe we've not done in the past. How many of you have created a buyer's representation or a buyer's presentation where you sit a buyer down and explain to them the process from start to finish? Sometimes agents have these conversations verbally, but maybe it's a good idea to create a flip book or within your brokerage to create a guide that you can duplicate and hand out to consumers so that they understand how this process works from start to finish. Not just the rule changes and not just about compensation, but just everything. We're going to tour homes, how the pre-qualification works, everything, option period, the home inspection, everything to closing from start to finish. Very rarely do I meet or hear agents talk about buyer's presentations. We're very accustomed to a listing presentation. That's a no-brainer. We've done that from the beginning. But now we need to kind of be willing to work a little bit harder and earn a buyer's business and explain the process to them. Really have an educated consumer going into the process, because I think in the long run, that's just going to help us. I hope that this little bit of information has been helpful, and as more information comes out, I will sit down and do the same thing and try to just give you guys some information. It's good to have these conversations because I don't know everything. My assumption is that nobody really fully understands the direction this is going to take us. But I think collectively as an industry and for me as a firm, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a mastermind meeting about, hey, how do we approach this? What is the best way for us to do this with the clientele that we specifically have? Because that is also, I think some of this is going to be different from market to market. I'm in a real estate market where the buyer is cash poor. So I may look at it differently than someone, let's say, in Las Colinas or the Dallas market or Highland Park, where a lot of the consumers, they have the cash. But having said that, does a consumer look at it and go, oh, I got to pay my real estate agent $15,000 for them to represent me to buy this house? We have to figure out how to have these conversations with the consumers, because I do feel that they need us. We understand the business. A lot of times we can see what's going to come around the corner where the consumer cannot. And some of these things are very valuable. They cost money. And so we have to learn how to be able to express the value of hiring us, because there's a lot of things that are going to be coming. We're going to have buyers coming to us that say, hey, I don't want to be represented. All right, what are the rules on that? How does that affect us? And then what does that mean for the seller? If you've got a buyer that says they don't want to be represented because they don't want to pay the commission, how does that affect me, and how does that affect my seller in that process? Can that buyer go through this process, buy a home, and then turn around and discover that they're not happy about someone or something in the process, and then sue the seller or sue me? These are a lot of the things that we have to be looking at and how we're going to approach this. For me specifically, I still want to ask my seller to offer buyers compensation. Can't force them, but I definitely want to ask them and try to explain to them why it's so important that they still provide that in a market like mine, where the buyers just simply, for the most part, aren't liquid. They don't have the money. We're in a VA heavy market. A lot of these buyers come to us with enough money in the bank to purchase the home, to put down earnest money, to option fee, pay their inspector. But outside of that, we have a lot of the buyers that have this expectation that they can still purchase a home with very little money in the bank. And if we took that away, it would really hurt a market like where I'm at in Central Texas. And be looking at that and kind of study your market too, and see what the consumer is able to do and what they're used to and what's culturally accepted. And that will kind of help you decide how you want to approach this and what your script is going to look like. Again, thank you for your time. My name is Rick Ott. If you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll do my best to give you my opinion. Thank you.